Okay, very good. So next week, Josh will be doing his presentation, and we look forward to that, Josh, your presentation. So tonight, as I mentioned, we want to talk about the 70 weeks of Daniel in Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. And so if you could please open up to that passage. And what we're going to see in this passage is it's going to talk about 70 weeks are determined upon Israel and upon the holy city of Jerusalem. And what we're going to say is those 70 weeks are not 70 weeks of days or 70 weeks of months, but they are 70 weeks of years. So it's talking about a 490-year period. And we'll see in the text, we're going to read it in a moment. We'll see in the text, if you look at the screen, it's divided into a 7-week period, that's 49 years, then a 62-week period, that's 434 years. That's 69 of the 70 weeks. Then there is a gap between the 69th and 70th week. And then there is the 70th week. And that gives us a major key why we do say that these are 70 weeks of years, because we know that 70th week is what week? The 7-year period we call the tribulation. And the days are given of it, the period of months, and then the months are always in 42 months, because that's from the middle of the tribulation. 1,260 days, 3.5 years, 42 months, 3.5 years. And Daniel 9, we'll see in this passage, something is going to happen in the middle of the week. So we have that 3.5-year period, because from the middle of the week to the end, it gets even more disturbing and more drastic and more judgment. So that's the 70th week. So these are the 70 weeks of Daniel. We're going to go through the notes, but I'd like for us to read this passage, and we'll go through it kind of one verse at a time. So Vinicius, could you please start us off with verse number 24, Daniel chapter 9, verse 24.
Yes, Pastor. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression, and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy.
Okay, so we do call this passage now the backbone of Old Testament biblical prophecy. And what we will see is the fulfillment of the prophecies in these 4 verses present a very strong evidence for the supernatural inspiration of the Bible. Because we're going to see that the first coming of Christ is prophesied. His death is prophesied. The destruction of the temple is all prophesied. That is all, those things have already happened. So this is a very powerful evidence of the supernatural nature of God's word. Now, this verse tells us about, number 1, in our blanks here, the prophecy relates to Daniel's people, Israel, and Daniel's city, Jerusalem. So we're really just going to stop on that for a moment and say, if it's dealing with, what does it say in verse 24 of Daniel chapter 9? 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city. So that means that it's not for who? It's not for the church. This is for Israel, national Israel, and upon Jerusalem, 70 weeks. So that's very critical. Now I have a quote here. Don't worry if you didn't get these blanks, we'll get back to them. Dr. John Whitcomb, who co-authored a book with Dr. Henry Morris on creation, and Dr. Whitcomb was a true scholar, man of God. He said this, a very powerful quote. It should be noted carefully that the prophecy does not focus on the church, but rather on your people Israel and your holy city Jerusalem. This hermeneutical key unlocks the meaning of large numbers of prophetic scriptures that have remained obscure during the centuries when Israel and the church have been considered to be essentially the same entity. And remember what we talked about too, that really when the Catholic Church rose into prominence in the days of Constantine in 325, AD 325, that they saw that the kingdom of God was going to be established on earth by the Catholic Church. And so that kind of led to this replacement idea of the church replaces Israel. So we've talked about that. But Whitcomb, I believe, is exactly right here. We have to keep Israel and the church distinct. So what are some of the promises here that God does make regarding Israel? How would you summarize these in verse 24, where it says, to finish the transgression, make an end of sin, make reconciliation for iniquity, bring in everlasting righteousness, seal up the vision of the prophecy, anoint the most holy. Do you see, okay, there's 6 things there. Do you see them grouped in any kind of way, or do you see any kind of general headings of those 6 things, or what do you see there? If you could just kind of respond to me. Look at that, and what do you see? Yes, Angela?
Behind, and the last 3 things are moving forward to God's plan.
Okay, yeah. So do you see that the first 3 things do deal really with sin, right? And the next 3 more focus on the establishing of righteousness. So the way I put it is like Israel's rebellion is dealt with, and Israel's righteousness that they have hope for, the kingdom that Jacob talked about, the peace of the kingdom, is going to be established at the end of these 70 weeks. Okay, so okay, that's good. Does everybody see that? You see that? That's how I saw it. Thank you, Angela. You agree with recology there. No, I'm just kidding. No, that's the Bible. I do see those. There's a seem to be a grouping, like in the first 3, to finish transgression, make an end of sin, reconciliation for iniquity. So we see sin, iniquity, transgression. And then the next 3, everlasting righteousness, seal up the vision, and anoint the most holy. Now, what does that mean? Okay, you don't have to answer unless you want. But so what are the first 3? What does the first 3 make you think of? If you could answer that. What do the first 3 things make you think of? Jeannie, were you going to say something? Oh, I thought you were going to say something. Does anybody want to say anything in Zoom? You could just, what do the first 3 make you think of? Well, what will have to happen for that to have for this to have happened? What will have had to happen for transgression to be finished, an end of sin, and a reconciliation for iniquity? What will have had to happen? Yeah. Christ, the Messiah had to come and die to bring that about. Okay. So by the end of these 70 weeks, Christ had to have come so that could be accomplished. Okay. So then the next 3, what do you see there? Or even let me ask, what do you think it means to anoint the most holy? The most holy what? In the millennium, let's just say, because I believe this is going to, after the 70-year period, it's going to lead into the coming of Christ and the 1,000-year reign, the millennial kingdom. What is going to be the centerpiece on earth in the kingdom of Jesus Christ on earth? The king ruling on the throne of David as the king and priest, the king according to the order of Melchizedek, king priest. And Ezekiel 40 through 48 tells us about this temple that the earth has never seen. So I believe that the anointing of the most holy is they have to anoint this temple will be built. And I don't know exactly what kind of temple is going to be during the tribulation, but something is going to happen in the middle of the tribulation that's going to bring a great desecration to the temple, and it will have to be anointed. And Jesus Christ himself will bring that cleansing and and anoint the most holy. I believe it's talking about the temple. That's my understanding there. Okay, so that's a bit of an overview of that verse. So the prophecy relates to Israel and Jerusalem. And then you could get number 2 at least here. Make sure you have number 2. This prophecy relates to the eternal promises that Messiah will bring based on his sacrificial death. Those are the first 3 things, and his sovereign power. That is establishing his righteousness. So he's going to remove Israel's rebellion, which will be forgiven, and Israel's righteous kingdom, where Christ's rule will be established. That's what he says at the end of these 70 weeks. Okay, any questions about that? Okay, so let's go to the next verse. Charlie, could you read verse 25, please? Daniel chapter 9, verse 25.
Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore, to build Jerusalem, unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times.
Okay, so he says 70 weeks. How many weeks are mentioned in that one verse of the 70 weeks? 69. He says 7 weeks and 62 weeks. 62 is 69, 62. 62 and 7 is 69. So what we're going to say here is that the first 7 weeks begins with a decree to restore and build Jerusalem, right? You see that? So point number 1, the clock starts. When does the clock start on the 70 weeks? The clock starts when there's a decree, a commandment to build Jerusalem. Now remember, this is Daniel chapter 9. What's the state of the temple when Daniel's praying in the beginning, first part of Daniel chapter 9? The temple is still in ashes. They're not out of captivity yet. They're still in captivity. But remember, Jeremiah had given a prophecy of 70 years. So, and that's at the beginning of Daniel chapter 9. Daniel was reading Jeremiah, and Jeremiah predicted 70 years they would be in captivity. So Daniel's like getting excited about coming out of captivity, and the temple is going to be rebuilt. And so that decree to rebuild Jerusalem by who? Who's going to do it? Not Babylon, but Babylon is going to be defeated by King. You remember the king? Cyrus, right? Cyrus, prophesied by Daniel. And Ezra tells us about King Cyrus, the Persian Empire, is going to decree that Israel can rebuild the temple until the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7. So that's what starts the clock. Now, most say that 49 weeks of time, which is 49 years, right? 7 times 7, 49. That would be 49 years, would bring us to the end of the prophets, to the end of the prophets, to the end of Malachi, basically to the end of the Old Testament, to the intertestamental period. So now here's a chart. You don't have to pay too much attention to all the details here, but he says, know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of the prince shall be 7 weeks and then 62 weeks. So that command, and this is in your notes here. Let me read number 3 just to keep following the notes. This is a period now of 70 weeks we're talking, and it's divided into 7 weeks, 62 weeks, and then a final week. So this is a total of 490 years, or 70 weeks. 70 times 7, 400 and, okay, are you okay with the math there? 70 times 7, 409. We're talking about a period of 490 years. And it's divided into 7 weeks, 49 years, 62 weeks, right? 434 years, and 1 week, 7 years. That's 490. So the first 69 weeks are summarized right there in verse 25. That's 483 of the 490 years. Now, that is how many days exactly? How many days is, if you have 69 weeks of years, 483 years, and a biblical year is, I hope you're not too tired for this. A biblical year, a biblical month, let's start with a biblical month, is a 30-day period. So they didn't have 31-day months. They didn't have 28-day months. They didn't have leap years. They just had 1 month was 30 days. And you could go back to Genesis and you could see that he talks about months. So most everyone has pretty much agreed that a biblical month, a prophetic month is 30-day month. So that would be 30 times 12. That would be a prophetic year. And a 483-year period, you're talking about exactly 173,740 days. Now, what this chart is doing is taking a prophetic month of 30 days and then trying to figure out if that's how many days prophetically 69 weeks of years are. 173,740 days. What this chart is doing is saying in our calendar time, that let's say a year was 365 days, and then with leap years and so forth, he even adds days for leap years. So he's saying that our year is 365 days, right? And a quarter. So you got to add a leap year. So it's a little complicated, then the math gets a lot more complicated. But this was a calculation of Sir Robert Anderson. And basically what he figured out is if you take that number of days and you start the clock with this decree to rebuild Jerusalem in 444, and you run it 173,740 days, it would bring you to the day of the triumphal entry. And if you look at what Jesus says there, I believe this, I do believe, and I've never heard it refuted, and I believe it based on the text, but I believe it based on especially what Jesus said. If you look at Luke chapter 19, and verse number 41, Luke chapter 19 and verse 41. And Liz, could I get you to read that, please, for us? Luke chapter 19, verse 41, and then down to verse 44. Luke chapter 19, 41 to 44.
Sure, Pastor. And when he was come near, he beheld the city and wept over it, saying, If thou hadst known, even thou, at least in this thy day, the thing which belong unto thy peace, but now they are hid from thine eyes. For the days shall come upon thee that thine enemy shall cast a trench about thee and compass thee round and keep thee in on every side, and shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee, and they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another, because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation.
Okay, so there's a number of things there. The last statement, you didn't know the time of your visitation. Should they have known it? Yes. And I believe Jesus is referencing Daniel chapter 9. You say, well, why do you say that? Because he says, if thou hadst known, even in this thy day. because and we're going to see this at the end of the 69th week, the Messiah will be crucified. And then after that, what's going to happen? Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. So what is Jesus talking about in verse 43 and 44? What's going to happen? Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. So he's referencing the destruction of Jerusalem as well. That's going to happen after the 69th week. So what I'm saying is this: the first coming of Jesus Christ, the timing of his coming was predicted. And they should have and could have known it, but it was hid from their eyes, Jesus said. So I do believe that's a reference to Daniel chapter 9. Maybe I'm getting a bit ahead of myself by saying all that. So let's go back. Does anybody have any questions at this point? So this little chart is in your notes on the next page. I just kind of threw it in there for fun as well. Okay, now let's go to so yeah. Do I have these blanks? Oh no. Okay. Yeah. Oh yeah, we actually have to do these here. Thank you. Okay, so let me say this. You might want to jot this down. What we see in and we're really on verse 25. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem, that's the clock starts right there. When there's a commandment to rebuild Jerusalem, that's where the clock starts. Then he says there shall be 7 weeks. That 7 weeks is the prophet's end. You might want to jot that down. That's 7 weeks from the commandment to rebuild to the end of that 7 weeks or 49 years. That's the prophet's end. Then what's really amazing here, again, he says, and 62 weeks. He doesn't say anything about this long period of time. Out of the 70 weeks, here's 62 of them, and he just says, oh, and then 62 weeks. In other words, 434 years are going to pass. What's going to happen? What's that period of time? That's the silent years. So it's not much is referenced about them because that's the intertestamental time. That's between Malachi and Matthew where there was no revelation. So it's kind of just reference. And I think the reason is they are the silent years, but a lot of things happen there. Daniel does prophesy about certain things, and Antiochus Epiphanes is prophesied in Daniel chapter 8. And of course, a lot of things happen there. What happens? The fall of Persia, the rise of Greece, the fall of Greece, the rise of Rome. A lot of things are happening. The world is getting ready for the coming of the Messiah. Do you know what's happening during that period of time, by the way? These 62 weeks, this silent years? Synagogues are being built around the world. Those synagogues in New Testament days will become what? They'll become basically churches or places where the gospel will be preached throughout the world. Roads are being built. Rome, the famous empire that built roads so the gospel can go out. So those silent years, that's kind of what's happening there. I'm sorry?
And language.
And language. That's right. Yeah, the Greek culture was spreading so that the Greek, yes, thank you. And unifying, if you will, the language of Greek. Okay, so the 70 weeks begins with the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem. This time period began in March 445, year 2, 444, 445. I mean, there you will see different years, but I did put 445 BC. Then Artaxerxes decreed Nehemiah to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And by the way, then one other statement here in verse 25, it says, the street will be built and the wall even in troublous times. So what does that describe? That describes what? The days of Nehemiah when they rebuilt the walls. What was it, trouble when Nehemiah built the walls? Yeah, he had a lot of trouble, a lot of opposition. So that well describes the days of Nehemiah and the rebuilding. So that's why we also say that this commandment to restore and build Jerusalem was the days of Nehemiah when Artaxerxes decreed for him to do that. Then the 69th week ends before the Messiah is cut off or crucified. And then we said this from March 14th, 445 BC, and this is what Sir Robert Anderson figured out, until April 6, 32 AD, is exactly that number of days, 173,880 days. That's an amazing thing. This time period would have been the day Jesus walked into Jerusalem and said, if you had known that this was this thy day. So Sir Robert Anderson on page 17, that's he figured it out, adding the days from, again, it's from March 445, and then Christ was crucified in April. So, he adds those 24 days, he adds the leap years, he counts the years for 365 days, and he does that, and he puts that, and it's the same number of days, 173,880 days. So, a very precise prophecy. Okay, so, and you know what this should do? This should excite us, one, to just believe in the amazing accuracy and precision of the Word of God, and get us excited to believe the Bible is true more and more. Okay, now let's move now to this next verse. Lorraine, could you please read verse number 26 for us?
Sure. Verse 26 says, "And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. And unto the end of the war desolations are determined."
Okay. Now, this is very important to differentiate. In verse 25, the Messiah, the Prince, is Jesus. Then in verse 26, Messiah shall be cut off. That is who? Jesus. And then it says, the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city. Who's going to destroy the city? Rome. And then there's a coming prince in the next verse. He shall confirm the covenant. So the prince, in the second prince here in verse 26, the prince that shall come is not Jesus Christ the prince, but who? The Antichrist. Okay, so now, so here what we have is after the 62-week period of time, and let me put this up. So there's a little chart here. I got this from Jensen's book on the survey of the Old Testament. He illustrates this pretty well. So he got a 7-week period here, and that's 440. He uses the same, he believes in the same dating that we're teaching here. It's the 7-week period. And by the way, I have good commentaries that this is not like some kind of wild-eyed interpretation. There's very faithful interpreters like John Walvoord and men like that who also agree with this interpretation. 7 weeks, 62 weeks. After 62 weeks, Messiah will be what? Cut off. Now, that's a very interesting statement. Cut off speaks of a violent death. So you might want to write that down. He's going to be cut off violently. But then what does it say? So not only will his death be violent, and does that not describe crucifixion? But then what does it say about his death? What does it say? Verse number 26. So what does that mean? His death is undeserved and substitutionary. Substitutionary. He died for us, right? Yeah, he died for us. So that gets to the heart of the gospel. The cross is the substitutionary death of Jesus Christ. Not for himself. Okay, so now watch what's going to happen here. Verse 26 gives a summary. Between the gap, do you get that blank? Let me go back to this. Okay, now, number 7. Verse 26 gives a summary of what will happen between the gap of the 69th and the 70th week. There's a gap. Guess where we are right now? We're in the gap. We've been in the gap since the day of the triumphal entry. If that dating is correct, that's what we're saying. And when in that gap, what is going to happen? After 62 weeks, now there's 70 weeks, the 70th week hasn't started, so it's a gap. Messiah is going to be cut off. Jesus is going to be crucified in that gap. But that's not all that's going to happen in the gap. What else is going to happen in that gap? Verse 26. Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. Jacob taught us about that in AD 70. And Jacob, you said it perfectly as well in your presentation. It says, the people of the prince shall come, shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, which they did. And you know what? Titus, the Roman general, actually tried to keep the temple from being destroyed because he knew it was a landmark. But God said it was going to be destroyed, and it was. And then it says, the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war, desolations are determined. That describes Jerusalem, what has happened in that city from the time of AD 70 till now. It's been a place where there has been what? One, desolation and destruction and fighting and warring after another. Even to this moment, Jerusalem is still a divided city, and it's still not controlled by the Jewish people. And we know that Muslims control the Temple Mount and so forth. So this is what's happening in the gap, and it's happening right now. So there will be a period of warfare and desolation in the gap period. So the three things that I have two of them in verse point 7 there. If you see point 7, said 1, Messiah will be cut off. 2, Jerusalem will be destroyed before the 70th week. But you might want to say 3, there will be a period of warfare and desolation for Jerusalem. That's prophesied there as well. And then Jerusalem will be destroyed by the people of another prince who is yet to come, who is the Antichrist. So we already made that emphasis. This tells us that the Antichrist will be from a revived Roman Empire, because the Antichrist is going to come out of the same empire that destroyed Jerusalem in AD 70. Right? That's how I read that. Okay, any questions? Are you guys glazed over yet? Yeah, one more verse and we'll be done with this. By the way, if you go to our YouTube page, and it's very easy to go to our YouTube page, you go to our website and you click the YouTube, and if you go to playlists, you will see all of our Daniel sermons. I preached 4 sermons on these 4 verses. So there's like 4 hours. I mean, you got a little time. But I said, I'm going to, for one and only time in my life, I'll never do that again, probably, unless I live maybe till 90, maybe I'll do it. But other than that, but I did 4 sermons, 1 sermon on each of these verses. So I'm trying to summarize that. Okay, Angela, question? The end thereof shall be with a flood. Good question. I think it must just be like I think that it's speaking perhaps more in a figurative way, a flood of desolation, a flood of warfare. I mean, there have been, you think about, and Jacob, you mentioned that the Ottoman Empire ruled in Jerusalem at one time, and then the Crusades came in, and the Christians tried to take over Jerusalem, and it's almost like a flood of armies would just flood into. You could say that the armies flooded. So I would look at it more that way. Micah?
Hamas called the October 7th attack the Al-Aqsa flood. So a surprise attack on Israel, which included a barrage of 3,000 missiles, air, sea, land penetration. So it's flood in a symbolic sense.
Of warfare. Flooded. Yeah, thank you, Micah. So Micah said that the Hamas group called October 7th attack, I'm just saying it in case they didn't hear you, like a flood. Al-Aqsa flood is what he said. Okay, so I don't want to extend this too long, but let's read the last verse here. And I asked Josh if you could read verse 27.
Verse 27 says, "And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate."
Okay, so here's the final blanks here. Number 10, verse 27 reveals the summary of the 70th week. This is a summary of the 7-year period of tribulation. And the book of Revelation expands on this 7-year period of tribulation, basically from Revelation chapter 6 through 19 or through 18. The 70th week begins with the signing of a peace treaty or covenant between the Antichrist and Israel. What will be the essence of that peace treaty? Based on what's going to happen in the middle of the treaty or the middle of the week, what do you think will be the basis at the beginning of the week of that peace? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there will be a reactivation of the sacrificial system. The Mosaic sacrificial system will be reactivated. So somehow this Antichrist, he is going to be able to figure out, maybe Islam will be so discredited in the world by then. I don't know what's going to happen, but somehow, or the temple will be rebuilt, the Temple Mount. And I know there's even disagreement on that. We don't have to get into all that, but Israel's going to rebuild their temple, and the Antichrist is going to have such credibility and weight of authority by working out this peace treaty finally, that the Western nations are just going to basically surrender to his authority. And this is the globalist empire that I believe we are working toward. We even see it happening now with the United Nations, with the World Economic Forum and things of that nature, a globalist empire. And this is why I'm not a globalist politically as well, to this in our day, because there's a lot of globalists out there who like the World Economic Forum. I'm not a fan. All right, but the peace treaty, a covenant between the Antichrist and Israel, and then number 12 now, we're on page 18, in the middle of the week or at the 3.5-year period, there will be a great abomination done by the Antichrist. We referenced that. We talked about that. We talked about how 2 Thessalonians 2:4, we looked at those verses. He's going to go into the temple, declare that he is God. The sacrificial system will cease. He will desecrate the temple, similar to what Antiochus, however you say his name, what he did in prophecy, and Daniel's prophesied him as kind of like an Antichrist type of personage. Now, I'll just say this as we close. Look at this. It says, he'll cause the sacrifice to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate. He will make the temple desolate, even until the consummation. I believe that's the second coming. The consummation is the second coming. And that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. That last desolate is the Antichrist, my understanding. In other words, the one who desolates the temple, destroys it, will be desolated. The one who destroys the temple will be destroyed. So that's how I read that. When it says he shall make it desolate, or he will destroy the system and he will destroy it. But then at the end, destruction will be poured upon him. That's how I read that. So I have circled the last verse there, or the last word, the desolate. I have that circled as the Antichrist. And so that's the end of the 70 weeks. That's the 70 weeks of Daniel, the backbone of biblical prophecy. Okay? Eugene's even there. Eugene's hung through here. I was talking to Eugene yesterday. He was having trouble with some of this. But I hope that helped a little bit, Eugene. Any questions? Did that help at all? Yes, Angela?
At the 3.5-year period with the great abomination, Is that the end of the first 3.5 years, beginning of sorrows, and like between that and the tribulation?
Yes. Yep. So that going to Matthew 24, that would be the end of the beginning of sorrows and go into the great tribulation. That, and Jesus referenced that, and he even says spoken by Daniel the prophet. And that's another reason why I think that, so this is another time Jesus references Daniel 9. I believe he did reference it on the day of the triumphal entry, and he references it here as well on the Olivet Discourse, which was just after the triumphal entry. It was during that week. If I have my dating right, I think I do. Yeah, I do. Okay, so yeah, that was in Matthew 24, and where he references the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, Matthew 24:15. Yes. Okay, any other question? Jeannie?
You said it's gonna be a revived Roman Empire from where the Antichrist comes from. What is specific verse you thinking?
Okay, so that the people who destroyed the temple in AD 70, there's going to be a prince out of that empire. But the Roman Empire doesn't exist as a world power now. And if we go into Revelation 13 as well, remember that beast that comes out of the sea. So that also speaks of like a return of this empire. And then that empire takes on those different images that Daniel spoke about in Daniel 7 of Medo-Persia, Greece and Rome, and the first one, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, in Revelation chapter 13. So it's a revived Roman Empire that takes on the characteristics of that. And remember, it is called, and basically his kingdom is called Babylon, which is, again, like a worldwide globalist empire. So, okay, and, we're doing the best we can too. When it comes to prophecy, we can't be 1,000% dogmatic on these things, but it's great I think it's kind of fun to look at, and it's amazing to look at our world. And I believe what I'm teaching from the Bible is consistent what's going on in the world today. Okay, so we'll close, and if you have any questions, let me know. And we have a quiz somewhere next week. I don't know where. I'm losing track of this. Do we have a quiz next week? And I think in the first class. No quiz next week.
Yay.
Come on, man. That's the best time. Okay. God bless you all. Thanks for being there. I hope you enjoyed the class tonight.
Hey, Pastor.
Yeah.
Yes,
Good
Josh.
night, everyone.
Pastor, good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Do you think that the in Luke 19:44, where he says, "They shall not leave in thee one stone upon another," do you think he's talking about like the temple specifically?
Yeah, and yes, I do. I do believe he's talking about the temple, even though there's a wall that's standing there, so
Now, that's kind of what I was leading to. Do you think that
Yeah.
that wall that's there was part of that temple, or do you think that it's possible? I researched this a little bit. I didn't dig too deep, but I figured it's a good time to bring it up. There are people that will say it's part that the Romans actually built a fort, and that wall that they have today is actually like part of that fort.
It could be the Fort Antonio.
Because those and I kind of believe this too, because Jesus, if he's talking about the temple, he said, hey, there's not going to be one stone upon another. That means there couldn't be a wall left.
Yeah. Actually, some people believe that the Temple Mount isn't really where they think it is. In other words, there was a Fort Antonio and there was a temple complex. And some people believe they got it backwards. In other words, a lot of people think where the temple was, that's where the fort was. And other people say, so if the temple was where a lot of people think Fort Antonio was, and Antonio is really where they think the temple was. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The wall that you're talking about was a part of the Fort Antonio complex, not the temple.
Right.
Yeah, could be.
Interesting. Either way, we know that the Bible is true.
Absolutely.
So,
but I do think you're onto something there. I do. Yeah. Thanks. That's good.
thank you, Pastor.
Okay. Any other questions hanging out there? Okay. I think we're good, everyone. God bless you. Have a good evening.
God bless you, Pastor. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.